The plea of the Gentile woman. Jesus, just to give you a little bit of setting, Jesus seeking some privacy. I mean, he had a real busy ministry. He had multitudes that were coming to him, and they were healing. He was healing them, healing them one by one. And he sought some privacy at a certain point in his ministry in Galilee. He said, I'm going to go out a little bit, get a little bit of a quiet time. At least that's what I believe he wanted. He wanted to just get some privacy time. Oftentimes, you'd see Yeshua on a mountain praying before the Lord quietly. So what he does is he takes an excursion and he goes to the borders of Galilee. And he goes to the borders of Galilee near Tyre, the city of Tyre, and I'll explain where Tyre is, and Sidon, which is Phoenicia, which would be modern day Lebanon. So he goes, according to some, he may have gone into the territory beyond Galilee, but I think Edersheim writes that no, he stayed within the borders of Galilee because his ministry was to Israel, not to the Gentile nations at this time. So we pick it up in chapter 7, verse 24. Jesus got up and went away, again for privacy, from there. The there that he goes away from is Capernaum. Again, he was leaving Capernaum, that's in Galilee. He did a lot of ministry in Capernaum. And he went there to the region of Tyre. Tyre is a Mediterranean seaport city, the capital of Phoenicia, which would become modern day Lebanon at this time. Now Tyre was 40 miles north of Capernaum, so it's quite a journey. But at least he got away from where he was for some private time, for some quiet time. And it says there that when he entered into a house, he didn't want anybody to know of it. Again, I think he just needed that time together, the setting privacy and rest, maybe opportunities to rest. But he could not escape notice. The Messiah, wherever he goes, is not going to be hidden for long because he's a light. He's a light in the middle of darkness. And of course, his deeds go before him. And once one person gets word, a Jewish community, once one person gets word, there's somebody who performed a miracle, man, it was like, people were coming. But anyway, one particular person came, a Gentile woman. Verse 25, but after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. She fell prostrate at his feet, expressing deep respect. When you fall prostrate on all fours and your face is to the ground, which I believe is what happened here, showing respect and also maybe personal grief that she was having with herself. So anyway, hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit, torn by an unclean spirit. Can you picture having a child that was being yanked back and forth by an unclean spirit? And yes, unclean spirits were also within children periodically, or as we read in scripture here. So can't imagine what she was going through as watching her daughter, but she heard of the Messiah, she heard of Jesus, and came and fell at his feet. Verse 26, Mark writes, now the woman was a Gentile of the Syrophoenician race. In other words, born in Phoenicia, which was part of the province of Syria. Phoenicia was a part of Syria, the province of Syria. Now Matthew, please note that there are two accounts of this Gentile woman and this incident that we're about ready to read. One of them's in Mark, which we're going to read, and the other's in Matthew. I'm going to have to bounce back and forth from Mark to Matthew and Matthew to Mark, but I'll try and make it smooth. And then at the end, we're going to do something called harmonizing. We're going to harmonize both the accounts to get the full picture, which is good, which is what we need to do anyway, to get a full picture. But the woman was a Gentile. Matthew's account says she was a Canaanite. That's not good. Canaanites, descendants of Canaanite or Canaan, and idolatrous. It was just not a good thing. So anyway, she was a Canaanite. And in Matthew's gospel, Matthew's account, she kept crying after them. She kept on basically fetching after them, all this time. She just wouldn't let go. She was persistent. It's one of the things I love about this woman, and we're going to see some more. But anyway, she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And at this point, I need to add a few other points here. Jesus, after a while, in Matthew, it says he turned to her and he said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that's in Matthew 15:24. So he does answer, he does respond to her after a while. But his answer was, look, I have a ministry priority. I was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And you know that from Scripture, as we've read. Anyway, she kept asking him to cast the demon out, and he answers her. And he says to her in verse 27, at this point, Jesus is going to use figurative language to convey his point. He's going to describe a situation, to convey his point, to convey truth in this matter. And he was saying to her, let the children be satisfied first. Okay, in other words, the children have to be fed first. It's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. It doesn't sound nice, but nevertheless, I don't think that Messiah was being really derogatory towards Gentiles, or specifically, calling them dogs, although in Scripture they were called dogs, wild dogs. But in this particular case, it's interesting because according to the translators, the dogs that they were referring to were small dogs, actually house dogs. And the scene here is that you have a setting where you're eating dinner. It's natural. You don't feed the dogs. You don't cast the bread to the dogs. You give it to the children first. Children are the priority. They get fed first, and maybe later on there's something else. But nevertheless, the dogs, they're out to forage for themselves. But in this particular case, the emphasis that he says that the children of Israel have the priority here. They have the priority that was sent to the house of Israel. Salvation of the Jews, he declares to the Samaritan woman. So he says it's not good to take children's bread and throw it to dogs. And again, he wasn't necessarily emphasizing the dog aspect. He was emphasizing the priority of his ministry. His priority were the disciples first, and of course Israel as well. They were to be fed, and then the children would be fed first. In other words, in the order of things. So again, not meant to be derogatory, but there's an order of priority here. Now the woman hears this, and her answer is fascinating, and we're going to dig into that a little bit later on as well. But she has an amazing response here. First of all, she wasn't insulted at that dog comment, okay? According to, I think from her perspective, he did have the right to refuse her at this point. But this is what she does. She answers in verse 28. She answered and said to him, yes, Lord, again, calling him Lord, once again with reverence. But even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs. What a response. That's true. That's true in my house. I have a dog, and she's always under the table, and she's okay to be under the table because she's foraging for crumbs. But at the same time, crumbs are being dropped, and the dogs, even at this point, dogs are, they feed on the children's crumbs. Amazing. First of all, she acknowledges her lowly position. As you summarize this real quickly, she embraces that his priority is to the children of the house. No question about that, the house of Israel. And she declares, using his illustration, that really both can happen at the same time. Because as the children eat, the dogs catch the crumbs at the same time as the children do. All she was asking for was a crumb. Because a crumb from God can mean a big, powerful thing. Just a crumb. Notice how I believe she just exalted the Messiah so much, and we're going to see how much more as we go to the harmonizing effect. Exalting him so much, realizing that all we need is a crumb of grace. I think I've written here, one crumb of power and grace from the Lord's table, shall cast the devil out of my daughter. Just one crumb. Okay. Anyway, and he said to her, and he says to her a lot more in Matthew's account, which we'll see. He said to her, because of this answer, Go. Because of this answer, the demon has gone out of your daughter. Notice how she was already healed before even he said anything else. This has already gone out. It's already a done deal. Without even a word, it's already a done deal. The demon's gone out of your daughter. And I'll let you know, just a sneak peek, he does tell the woman, "Oh woman, great is your faith." Great is your faith. So, she no longer bothers him. She believes him. And going back to her home, we pick it up in verse 30. She found the child lying on the bed, the demon having left, cast down upon the bed. I think the picture there is that, demons, when they depart, they don't leave very gently, like, "Hey, see ya, nice abiding with you." No, they jerk, and there's probably a messy time as this demon was wrenching himself, because he had to, from this child's body. And she was probably exhausted. She just cast on the bed, the demon having left. All right, that's the first incident. This next miracle is only recorded in the Gospel of Mark. The powerful healing of the deaf mute. Again, verse 31. And again he went from the region of Tyre and came through Sidon. Sidon is 20 miles north, to the Sea of Galilee within the region of Decapolis. Decapolis was a 10-city region on the eastern shore of Galilee. So he's going to be back in Galilee, going from Tyre to Sidon, then swooping down after that, to the eastward, to the east side of the Decapolis is on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. If you picture the Sea of Galilee, he did a lot of ministry in that whole general area there. But anyway, he's back in Galilee. In verse 32, probably to a mountain. He probably went to a mountain knowing that that's where he ministered, because he was able to see the people and speak to the people at that time. And they brought him one who was deaf, one who spoke with difficulty. Please note that long continued deafness, many of you can attest to this, is apt to produce imperfect speech. When somebody's been deaf a long time, though they could have probably spoken, they're not able to speak because, the learning process is broken. Okay, and they're unable to produce, good speech. So a lot of times deaf people can't really talk well. So he spoke with difficulty. And I'm speaking with difficulty now. Anyway. So what Jesus did, they brought to him one who was deaf, who spoke with difficulty, and they implored him, the friends, to lay his hands on him for healing. So they wanted him healed. And laying hands was often a time, an opportunity, where you can convey healing on somebody. Sometimes Jesus spoke with a word. Sometimes in this particular case with the woman and her daughter, he didn't even have to speak. But then sometimes he would lay his hand. And this particular incident, he does a procedure. And I could never understand the procedure. I think I've got a little bit of insight into it. So hang in there with me. So anyway, Jesus took him aside from the crowd by himself. He took this deaf mute man and he pulled him away from the crowd, whoever was following him. He took him by himself, alone, to deal with him personally. And this is interesting. And he put his fingers into his ears. Almost like, I think the picture there in the Greek is like he thrust his fingers into his ears, almost like, to clear a path, okay? He thrust his fingers into this man's ears, and after spitting, he touched his tongue with the saliva. He spit in his hand and touched the man's tongue with his saliva. And Jesus applied saliva in another healing, by the way, the blind man at Bethsaida. There's also another incident of this. But anyway, he touched his hands with the saliva. By the way, the use of saliva was a well-known Jewish remedy for affecting the eyes. In this particular case, it was the tongue that Yeshua was trying to affect. Anyway, after he did this, he looked up to heaven, and with a deep sigh, and I think he looked up to heaven so the man could see that this is something of God, looking up to heaven. As Messiah looked up to heaven when he started feeding the 5,000. He looked up to heaven, And with a deep sigh, it was a groan, a groan within Messiah. And I don't know exactly why he groaned at this particular time, but I do believe that since he was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, he's just maybe correlating with the corruption of the world and what people have to go through, and in this life. So he groaned, bearing grief with the man, coinciding with the man. And he said to him, Ephphatha. Ephphatha is Aramaic. Just for brief, Aramaic is a Semitic language used primarily in Syria. The Jews picked it up when they were in the Babylonian exile. Excuse me. And took it back with them when they came back to Israel, and it became the lingua franca of the region. In other words, the common language. So Yeshua spoke Aramaic. He may have also spoke Hebrew, but I think for the common language of the marketplace, it was Aramaic. Anyway, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. In other words, just commanded, be opened. Be ears and tongue opened. In verse 35, and his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue, the Greek word there is the string on his tongue or the band on his tongue that kept him, you've heard the terminology, tongue-tied. Well, that kept him back from actually speaking properly. The impediment of his tongue was removed, and he began to speak plainly. So, what is all this about? I'm not 100% sure, but I have at least maybe an explanation. I've never had the experience of being totally deaf, and I certainly haven't had the experience of not being able to speak, which of course I'm grateful for both of those. But picture yourself as being deaf. You can't hear a thing. You got a crowd, a multitude. Your friends are bringing you to this man who you've never met, and not understanding what's going on. Nobody's explaining it to you. Nobody's explaining to you what's going to happen, and how it's going to happen. So Jesus wanting to convey, I think, of course, a message to this individual, because whatever Yeshua did, he was prompting upward faith, faith towards God. And that was the witness he had towards all those, that I believe he healed, that this was giving glory to God. And of course, he's the Word made flesh doing all this as well. But anyway, Jesus goes and if you were to explain to a deaf man, what exactly you're going to do, you might put your fingers in his ears, indicating that something was going to happen. He understood that he couldn't hear. Yeshua understood that, put his fingers in his ears, thrust it in his ears. And the fact that he touched his tongue with his saliva indicated, that there was going to be something done with his lack of speech. And then looking to heaven, realizing and getting a man to understand, to look upward with him, that he might realize this is coming from above. This is going to be a miracle from above. And of course, he was the institutor of this miracle, as he was. So anyway, it gives me an idea. I think if you picture yourself as somebody who can't hear, and you want somebody to convey what you're doing, or convey you pull them aside, and hey, something's going to happen here, look upward, and of course he speaks Ephphatha, which is be opened. Anyway, and that's what happened. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it kind of makes sense to me, because I'm looking at this procedure and I'm saying it's a little unusual. Why don't you just heal the man? Why don't you just boom, heal him? But Yeshua has generally the idea, I think he tries to convey, that he wants the man's heart to be in a specific direction, specifically upward with faith. So anyway, what happens here, he gave orders not to tell anyone again. He didn't want to stir up the scribes and Pharisees who were after him anyway. But the more he ordered them to stop telling him or telling people, the more widely they continued to proclaim it. In other words, abundant proclamation. And they were utterly astonished. That's talking about the Jewish people, the people that were around that were seeing all this. They were utterly astonished. The word in Greek, and utterly astonished, they were just overwhelmed. with amazement. They were just out of their shoes, saying, he has done all things well. Talking about the Messiah. He has done all things well. He's done it rightly. He's done it correctly. Some commentators said that his ministry was one of modesty, humbly, devoutly. And by the way, his ministry was without money or price. He just did it, okay, in simplicity. And then here's a line that I think gives me the insight. Mark writes, talking about the people, the people were saying, he makes even the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. And I believe that this particular text alludes to Isaiah 35 verses 3 through 6. Isaiah 35, 3 through 6 describes the characteristics of the kingdom age to come. And several of those characteristics are that the blind will see, and of course he was healing blind. The ears of the deaf will be unstopped, almost like pulling out, like what he was doing, thrusting and making a hole to hear. The ears of the deaf will be unstopped, and the tongue of the mute will shout with joy. So when they say he's doing all things well, I think it's a picture of the messianic kingdom that they're acknowledging, that this is something that's going to take place when the Messiah happens. The blind are going to see, the lame are going to leap like deer, the deaf are going to hear, and the people are going to be able to speak, the deaf are going to speak. In other words, he does all things well, and it was affirmation. That's my personal perspective of it. All right, we looked at 2 miracles. We've covered all the text. Now, I want you to follow with me and bear with me, okay? Because there may be some repetition here. But when you see it, I think you're going to see a wonderful picture here, because it's good to be able to harmonize the scriptures, to take different texts, pull them together and see the bigger picture. Because when Matthew gives an account, he's got more details than Mark. But when Mark gives an account, he's got more details to a certain degree than Matthew. Matthew doesn't even talk about the deaf mute, but Mark does. Okay, so anyway, I've got eight outline points with text from both the accounts, okay? So bear with me as we harmonize this and give a more detailed account. First of all, we see the pilgrimage to the regions of Tyre and Sidon. It's an outline form. It's called a summary outline, but again, harmonizing the text. So for privacy, and he went to the borders of Galilee. So we have that initially spoken of. Secondly, we see the persistent pleas of the Syrophoenician woman, who was also described as a Gentile and a Canaanite in Matthew. In Mark we read, but after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of the Syrophoenician race, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. We already read that just now. Now listen to Matthew's account. Matthew writes this, Matthew 15, 22 through 23. And a Canaanite woman from the region came out and began to cry out, saying, have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. That's a big detail there. When she says son of David, what is she acknowledging? She's acknowledging that's a messianic title. When you call somebody the son of David, because Messiah would be from the ancestry of David, the son of David. So I believe that's a beautiful detail to point out here. In other words, she's the Syrophoenician woman, but she knows the messianic title referring to the Messiah, and actually basically calling him from that title and acknowledging him as the Messiah. And she says, my daughter is cruelly demon-possessed. But he didn't answer her a word, Matthew writes. And his disciples came, listen to this. His disciples came and implored him, saying, send her away because she keeps shouting at us. Shouting at us. I picture this woman, and I really have a great deal of respect for her, shouting at the disciples, shouting, keep shouting, send her away. Lord, send her away. I mean, he didn't answer anything, but eventually he would. But the idea of this frantic mother, and it's a blessing. It's a blessing to have a mother that has that much love, and a lot of mothers do, for their child, enough to just be boldly, basically insisting that something happened to take care of my daughter. That kind of strong love. It reminds me of those mothers that are persistent in prayer all the time, persistent in prayer for their children, for their loved ones, for those that she cares about. It's just the spirit of motherhood that God has given women, at least many women. Not all women have that, but just the picture of being that persistent. Shouting, give her away, she's shouting at me. Reminded me, I don't know if you ever seen the movie Kevin Costner movie. What was that, where he's in the field? I forget. Field of Dreams. Thank you, dear. I watch it all the time, and I'm just having a little slip up here. And he goes to search out this author, and this author is living right in the middle of Boston, in the middle of Jewish town, right in the middle of the Jewish section. And he's asking people, where can I find, this author? And he starts and he's bugging this older woman. And the older woman walks away. She's old and go away from me, you pest. I tell you nothing. Anyway, it reminded me of that, where there's the idea of just pestering someone to the point where, till you get a response. But anyway, I thought about that movie when I thought about this text. Anyway, send her away. She keeps shouting us. Persistent. She keeps fetching at us. Anyway, the pointed response of the Messiah. This is straight from Matthew. Matthew says this, but he, Jesus, answered and said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Again, once again, and I said this before, salvation is of the Jews. This was his mission. So he responded to her. The fourth point is the painful appeal again. This is something that Mark does not write. Matthew, this is not in Mark, this is in Matthew. But she, the woman, came and once again bowed down before him, saying, Lord, help me. Again, just help me. Just a cry of help. A show of humility. Bow down before him, saying, help me. And then the priority of the children of Israel once again is expressed to her. And he was saying to her, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. We went through that. It is not good, it says the Matthew account, it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Very similar. Nothing against the dogs, but there's a priority of mission here that he was conveying to her. The sixth point is her response once again. She answered and said to him, yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs. And this is humbly asking him to partake. She could partake even as a dog, the crumbs. They would satisfy her need. And in Matthew writes, the dogs, Jesus is saying, Matthew writes this, the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from the master's table. This is what the woman said to Jesus. The dogs feed on the crumb that fall. In other words, he's the master. From his table would come crumbs. And the dogs feed on those crumbs. And I want to be one of those that gets the result, just a crumb. Anyway, the seventh point is the praise of the woman's faith, which we didn't see in Mark, but here we see it in Matthew. Jesus said to her, "O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish." And we know from various accounts that it's faith that pleases God, faith that pleases him. They that come to God must believe, Hebrews 1:6, I believe, they that come to God must believe that he is, and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Faith, your great faith is great. It shall be done to you as you wish. And her daughter was healed immediately at once in Matthew 15:28. Finally, the last point, the eighth point, the powerful healing proclaimed. Mark says this, and he said to her, "Because of this answer, go. The demon has gone out of you, out of your daughter, a done deal. No words needed." And going back to her home, she found the child lying on the bed, the demon having left at once, and immediately. Real quickly, you see how the harmony just fills in the gaps in the details, just to be able to see some insights, and be able to see the fuller picture. That's why you need to read all four Gospels, because they give a complete picture of, the Messiah and his life and ministry. The healing of the deaf mute. Real quickly, we saw a petition for the healing before the Lord from his friends. We see Messiah's preference for privacy. Jesus takes this man aside. We see the procedure for the deaf man's healing. The thrusting in his fingers, making way, unstopping unstopping whatever it is that was obstructing, spitting and touching his tongue, looking up to heaven, and the Aramaic command, Ephphatha, be opened, unstopping his ears. We see the powerful healing, which was immediate. We see the plea for no public discourse, don't stir up the opposition. And we see the praise and amazement of the people. He has done all things rightly. And that was the conclusion of this text. All right, at this point, boy, I'm a little early. I'm early. I'm going to take a swig real quick. Are you okay? Were you able to see the account? It's really a beautiful picture. Forgive me for struggling up here. I wasn't sure whether I was going to have a voice at all. I have some personal thoughts real quickly as I close on this Syrophoenician woman. I love this woman's passion and I love this woman's persistence. And again, it reminds me of just people that have been persistently seeking the Lord in prayer. I love this picture of persistence because her persistence eventually opened that door. I love her persistence. I love this woman's reverence and humility before the Lord. She was not offended by his figurative language of referring to her as a dog. She wasn't offended by it. Hey, as long as I'm a dog under the master's table eating crumbs, I'm okay. It's better to be a doorman in the tent of the Lord than a dweller in the tents of wickedness. So anyway, she wasn't offended. I love her humility. She was not jealous of the children, the Jews, being referred to as God's sovereign choice, the children to receive the bread. She wasn't jealous. Well, why aren't you dealing with us like you're dealing with the Jewish people? Aren't we of you as well? Anyway, she wasn't jealous. And she believed that even dogs at this same time, present time, can enjoy the crumbs from the master's table. For crumbs from God are better than owning a castle of riches. Just crumbs from God are better than owning anything. So she acknowledged just by what she asked for, how she esteemed and thought of him with regard to his divinity, his manifestation of the Almighty in front of her. Crumbs from God are more powerful than any power in this world. I also love the fact that the Lord was persuaded to change his decision. That's something maybe you don't necessarily see often in Scripture, but the Lord can be persuaded by faith, by extraordinary faith, by somebody who's persistent, by somebody who is crying and calling upon him. He said, I'm sent not to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Got this pesky Gentile that's still pursuing and just basically reasoning and saying, look, I love your analogy. I love your figurative description. But even at the same time, the children are eating bread. Can we not get a few crumbs, which automatically fall from the table anyway? What a picture. What an amazing picture. That the Lord was persuaded to change his decision. I also take note that once again, God is pleased with extraordinary faith. God is pleased with extraordinary faith. When you have faith, especially in difficult times. And it's obvious this woman had faith. She just, believed in the Lord. She had faith. I also take note that this child was healed immediately without even a spoken word. I think that's purposeful in the scriptures that he just turned to her before she could even say anything else and said, she's healed. Go see her. It's gone. It's a done deal. That's power. That's real power. That's like with the thought, and he's distant. He's a distant. He's far from her. He's not that he's far from her, but he's not in her presence. That's the Lord. That's divine power. And I'm at a bottom line. The bottom line is, by the way, she went her way. When he said, go your way, She didn't say, well, you got to come. You got to come and do the healing. Come with me. Aren't you going to come? Or are you concerned that you got to come so I can get a crumb from you? She said, no, just go your way. And she didn't fuss about that. As soon as he said go, she believed his word automatically. She just believed his word. And again, the bottom line, if I was to pull something from this, I'm encouraged to share with you that I think this picture, or this idea of being persistent in prayer is important. And for those of you that pray persistent in prayer, it's okay to be a holy nuisance before God. And that's basically what this woman was. It's a holy nuisance. But God saw her heart and saw her faith. I do hope and pray that we could learn how to pray and just pray before the Lord and have that kind of heartfelt, prayer before God, and the prayer that catches attention and changes things. And it doesn't mean that you don't have that, because I've been praying for things for years and it's not necessarily, come to pass. It doesn't mean that God doesn't hear, and it doesn't mean that God's not going to answer it at a later point in your life. But to be persistent in prayer. There's a regimen that I go through, many of you know it, where, I have to discipline myself to spend time in prayer, and do some prayers towards God that are along the lines of not only confessing my sins, but also praising him, to praise him with specific praiseworthy why I'm praising him. That he's the creator of the world. He's the author of salvation. He protects us. He provides for us. He's our righteousness. He's wisdom, the works of wisdom. He's the love, the mercy of God. I mean, every morning I think, oh man, I'm going to go through this routine again. But every time I get into it, it becomes new to me each time. So, not that God's going to necessarily reward that, but hopefully, that he knows where my heart's at with regard to persisting in that prayer, knowing how important it is that he be involved in the spiritual walk and life of my life.